Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Accountability matters. Our nation deserves nothing less than full transparency from federal officials working in the name of the American people. When government officials abuse their office to infringe on Americans' right to free speech, it is a very grave offense. Government officials who abuse official, taxpayer-funded resources to censor Americans need to be out of government service for a long time. My amendment allows the Office of Special Counsel, which adjudicates the Hatch Act and would adjudicate the newly added provisions of this bill, to punish those employees with a longer span of debarment. This amendment revises the disciplinary action under the bill to allow for a debarment from federal employment for up to 10 years rather than 5. This better reflects the gravity of their offense. People who abuse their official office to violate Americans' constitutional rights shouldn't be able to return to government employment after a brief stint in the private sector. I urge adoption of this amendment, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Gentleman from New York. For what purposes does the gentleman from New York seek recognition?
I rise in opposition to the amendment at the desk.
Gentleman is recognized.
Accountability matters, says my friend from Tennessee. And his amendment would want to place further penalties in the hands of the Office of Special Counsel, which, as he mentions, is the office that also adjudicates the Hatch Act. Well, if you want accountability, let's start talking about the Hatch Act. Let's talk about the 13 Trump administration officials who violated the Hatch Act. Let's talk about Kellyanne Conway, who had more than 60 violations of the Hatch Act, so many that the Office of Special Counsel that the gentleman from Tennessee references recommended that she be fired. Did anything happen to her? No. And you know what she said? She said, "Come talk to me when there's a jail sentence." Well, that's why last week in our markup on this bill, I introduced the Kellyanne Conway amendment, which would have added criminal penalties for a knowing, willful, and intentional violation of the Hatch Act. Now, as we all know, the Hatch Act is actually a law that prohibits government officials from abusing their office, as the gentleman from Tennessee just said. But without teeth in those penalties, the Trump administration, senior officials, ran roughshod all over that. Unfortunately, what Mr. Ogles and the chairman are focused on is not on adding accountability to prohibit government officials from abusing their positions for political purposes. Instead, we're talking about the phantom problem of government officials abusing their authority to censor free speech, none of which has happened. And yet here we are with so many examples of violations of the Hatch Act, but we're not dealing with that. We're not dealing with actual evidence, actual facts, actual violations of the law to put accountability, as the gentleman from Tennessee says, and some teeth into our laws under the jurisdiction of the Oversight Committee to prevent abuse of power by government officials. That is where we should be spending our time, not on this bill and not on this amendment, which already has plenty of punishment for those who are in violation. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
I thank my colleague from across the aisle. You know, this bill simply empowers the Office of Special Counsel to better do and adjudicate their job. I yield time as necessary to the gentleman from Kentucky, Chairman Comer.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. The Protecting Speech from Government Interference Act aims to prevent federal employees from censoring the lawful speech of Americans. My colleague's amendment further strengthens the enforcement of this new prohibition on federal employee actions by increasing the potential debarment penalty from 5 to 10 years. Increasing this debarment for up to 10 serves as a strong deterrent to federal employees and clearly underscores Congress's understanding of the significant harm these censorship activities have done to America's trust in their federal government. We must rebuild this public trust that the federal agencies Congress is charged with conducting oversight over are operating within the boundaries of their lawful authorities. Civil servants that extend their duties beyond their legal authority to encroach on the speech rights of Americans do not deserve to serve in our nation's government. I ask my colleagues to vote yes on this amendment, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
I'm prepared to close. I'll reserve.
Gentleman
yield.
reserves.
I yield.
Gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
I yield.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
You know, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to appear so tough that 5 years of debarment from government office, from federal employment rather, is not enough. So we're going to make it 10 because 5 just doesn't do it. The difference between 5 and 10 is going to mean that some government official who's trying to censor lawful speech on the internet is going to say, whoa, 10 years, oh, I'm not going to do it now, but 5 years. These amendments are trivial, they're unnecessary, they have no meaning, and yet the meaningful amendments were not allowed to be brought to the floor. Apparently, the open rules only apply to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. They do not apply to us, and that is a shame because there are some very significant amendments that would make this bad bill slightly better. For that reason, I oppose this amendment, and I yield back.
The gentleman